I want to make it very clear that the card that Father Henry had in his pocket was never shown to Cardinal Hickey. We sat down. Cardinal Hickey asked me if the building could be constructed. I said, yes, it can, and I can now tell you for what cost. Shortly after that meeting, there was one last meeting with the building committee. But the Chancery or Cardinal Hickey had not informed them that I had been told through the Bowie Construction Company to proceed. And one of the contractors on the building committee told me that we were ready to go out for competitive bids. And I said, no, we don't need to do that. And I held up my estimate and told him that this was our bid, that it was competitive, and that all I needed to do now was to put up a Bowie construction sign at Ascension and get a building permit. And of course, there were objections. That time, Monsignor Essex informed the committee that this was the first time that the diocese had allowed a company to build one of their projects without other bidders. The permit process was very smooth, both from the state and the county. We had a little snag with the city of Bowie, but there was a good reason behind that. The snag was that they felt we needed a stormwater management system, and we installed the system so as not to delay the project. The actual building went very smoothly. The ground where we now stand, as far as the foundation, caused a serious problem. When the church burned down, we backfilled the church with the church. We just scraped everything into the basement and then brought in 3 or 4 feet of fill. The structural engineer that was working with the architect was one of the most outstanding engineers in the country. His name was Mike. I will leave his last name out. And the reason for that will be given later. But Mike told me that without a doubt, this was the worst ground what can you do? And he says, I'll design a pedestal type foundation, much like that in an office building, where there would be large footings and then a pedestal, and then filled up to the slab grade, and then the steel would turn through the columns. What this means is that even if all of the soil or dirt under the church was washed away, we would still be on those pedestals. It was somewhat expensive, but it was a good fix, a good cure. From that time on, we really began that Christmas. The reinforcing steel was ordered early. I took a chance and ordered the steel before we had a signed contract, which isn't normally done. But at the same time we did that, from then on the construction proceeded almost without a hitch, smooth as silk. We were not church builders. We had done some work, Blessed Sacrament Chapel and the shrine, the Franciscan Chapel and the shrine, a nursing home, St. Anne's Nursing Home in Washington, and that was it. That's all of diocesan work that our company had ever done. And so this was something entirely different. We did something that the progress photos in this book will show. We took the building completely out of sequence. Normally, all the wood columns would go up, be tied in, and then the bricklayer would start. We didn't do that. We did them both at the same time. We ran the columns ahead of the brickwork and pocketed them out at the columns, and just simply came back and filled them in later. This saved 6 weeks in the construction schedule. Totally out of sequence. The laminated beam contractor told me he had never seen it done. But we did. And that idea came from our superintendent, Joe Durr. The contract proceeded nicely. The building began to take shape. One of the model mechanics told me that there was something here that he'd never seen on a construction site. And I think I knew what he was talking about, but I didn't know anybody else noticed it. The men loved to come here. It was a happy place to work. There was no arguing about, that's my scaffold, you can't use it. They worked together. And the building along with the schedule of time that we had made up. In October of 1986, Father Henry asked if we could finish by Thanksgiving. I told him we would have to look at the pieces, get some delivery dates, and we would let him know. Our answer to him was that it would be tight, but we could finish. Now, we're coming down to the last couple of months, and I received an emergency call from our office, and it was our general manager. One of the little things that I did was, when we were slow, I would go around town and pick up small contracts. We called them little jobs. The general manager told me that we had a little job. And I asked him where, and he said, this job is in El Salvador, at the American Embassy. And I said, excuse me, you know that those folks are right in the midst of a civil war. And he said, well, not anymore. They kind of signed an armistice. And I asked why, and he told me that was because of the earthquake. Now, the bottom line here is that he wanted me to go to El Salvador to arrange and line up a special crew to weld the columns back together in the embassy so that we could get our equipment out, so that the embassy could remove their computers. I had kind of put together a crew which included a Mr. Paul Wills, who was a certified welder. Instead of going myself, I sent the superintendent on the church. It's kind of funny with the welder, because when I called him, he had just finished a project for us. And I said, I have another job for you. And he said, where? And I said, the Salvadorian Embassy. And he said, I don't know where that is. Is that on Massachusetts Avenue? And I said, no, it's in El Salvador. And of course, it came back. I was shot at in Vietnam, and now I'm going to be shot at in El Salvador. They have called the Civil War off. I said, Monday, you will be walked through for your passport. Tuesday, make a list of everything you think you'll possibly need. And I'll give you the place, the name of the place to buy it. Friday, I will take you to BWI Airport, meantime, we had cleaned out our yard on Allentown Road and had gone to Andrews Air Force Base where a plane was waiting to pick up this emergency material. They would not let us fly directly there from Andrews because we were civilians. And so, with 2 weeks left, we're trying to make up time. I'm without a superintendent. One funny thing at the airport is that the State Department had paid for the plane ticket, but not for the freight. And I didn't think it would be that much. And I reached in my pocket, and I says, "How much you need?" It was $884.63, which I put on my visa. Called it miscellaneous hardware. The work in El Salvador was completed. The superintendent returned a few days before we finished the church. In the meantime, the last couple of days we worked around the clock. Plus, I'm worried about the people that I sent to El Salvador, especially when I should have gone myself. So that created some anxiety with me. I felt somewhat compromised. But the church was getting closer and closer. 3 days before the consecration, and there is a difference between a dedication and a consecration. Bishop Laurie, now Bishop Laurie, he was Monsignor Laurie then, came out to visit. And my men are scurrying around, and he says, "Jim, you'll never finish on time. There are no pews in the church." And I said, "Well, that's right. They'll be here at midnight tonight. By noon tomorrow, they will be finished." They showed up at midnight. By 11 o'clock the next day, the pews were finished. From that point on, it was simply cleaning, installing a few pieces of millwork here and there. Like I said, we put in a lot of hours. The job finally closed, we finished. We got to watch a liturgy which had been seldom used. As a matter of fact, the previous cardinal, Cardinal Boyle and Cardinal Hickey, had never done a consecration. You see these like little crosses on the walls. That tells you that the church was consecrated. The requirement for consecration is that the pulpit be permanent and not movable, that the altar is permanent and not movable, that the pews are permanent. And so we met this old, ancient criteria. They tell me that the service was beautiful. I did deacon the Mass with Ray Barrett. I must confess that I fell asleep during the service. Father Henry asked me later, he said, "What's the matter with you?" And I says, "I'm tired." A few months later, I went to see Cardinal Hickey about becoming a priest. And he said, "Wow, Jim, you got a great job. You're good at it. You're a permanent deacon. You got the best of both worlds. What do you want to do this for?" And my answer, I wasn't quite sure how he would take it. But I says, "Well, it has nothing to do with what I want. I've already done that. I've done that for 48 years, exactly what I wanted. Does that make sense?" And he said, "Yes, it does. You start school in August," which I did. Our little side job in El Salvador concluded. The general manager came back one day and told me that they refused to pay the bill because they didn't find the 4x4s that we had sent. And I said, "Fine, have them check with the people that took the other half of what was on that airplane and ask them what they did with the 4x4s. Remember now, I have $884.63 of my own money in this deal." He came back smiling. They've agreed to pay. They did pay. Mr. Volpe called me about a month later to thank me for this wonderful check that we received from the State Department. And he said, "What's the job number?" I says, "There is none." "Where was it?" "What's the address?" "The American Embassy in El Salvador." "Where's the correspondence?" "There is none except my bill. And once they pay that, we were never there. It never happened." I was then able to tell Father Henry where his superintendent had gone off to. I told Henry he was on vacation. And when he came back, he looked like he was on vacation. 10 pounds heavier and very, very suntanned. But it wasn't that easy for them over there. And so that kind of concludes the construction. The original ceiling was wood with rosettes. I had taken a picture of the ceiling and then painted the rosettes on the picture. Father wanted to jazz the ceiling up somewhat, and he said, yes, I like that. When that was all done, I said, now are you satisfied? He said, almost. Shortly after I was ordained, he asked, who in the country does vaulted ceilings? I says, I only know one contractor. His name is Giannetti. He does custom work. He's very expensive. Forget it. And he said, well, how expensive? I said, how far do you want to go? But he did, like I said earlier, put up a sample, which I had some objections to. And this work probably began in the early 90s. When I came here in 95, it was half finished down the middle. My proposal to the parish was paint the ceilings red and not do the vaulted ceiling in the transepts. The parish was pretty much in agreement that they wanted the whole thing. And so, with the help of parishioners painting the blue background on the, I think they were 3x3 or 4x4 panels, we were able to complete this work. Very expensive, very ornate, and probably one of the few contractors in the world that could have done this work. Cardinal Hickey asked me later in 95 or 96 at a confirmation, stuck his head in the door and he said, Jimmy, is that gold paint or is it gold leaf? I told him it was the latter. Yes, it was expensive, and he never mentioned it again. The only other items that are new since the original building are the sound system and the new organ. Something special is that the supply and return air grill are hid in the shrines instead of a big, ugly louver in the back wall. And believe it or not, that was Father Henry's idea. So he had a flair for design. The only other thing that's a little different is that the new organ. The contractor assured me that he had the entire contract. And I said, do you have the electrical work too? He says, oh yes. Where will the speakers be? And he says, in the back in that loft. And I says, how do you propose to get your wiring back there without dragging it across our beautiful panels? He says, we never thought of that. I says, I have. You will run it in an underground tunnel around the perimeter. I'll bring in an electrician to do that part that did the building. And so we were able to do that with all the wiring completely hidden. Other than that, the church is pretty much the same as it was in 1996.